go to Moodle and get it.
It's on colonization, do you see? It's this one.
Yeah, it's just,
13
the white
colonies.
signature.
Okay,
Where is it?
13 colonies. So if you bring it up, that's great. Just if you can't bring it up for some unknown reason, then look at your next one real
It's
quick.
in Moodle, so you should bring it up.
You could have it just in Moodle also.
I don't see this.
That's it. That's it. Okay, one of the things that I want you to,
I need math.
I guess I'll wait. Are we there yet?
I don't know.
Remember, this is world history. In world history, I have a lot of information that I've got to teach you that is global. U.S. history, I would focus more on teaching you all about, the various colonies, the reasons why they were established, or even the American Revolution itself. We would spend days and days studying the American Revolution. I know you've already covered some of those things. We're going to pick that up a little later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you set up historically for Dr. Hendrickson to talk tomorrow about the French Revolution and things. So I'm going to get you to that point, okay, with U.S. On the grid that you're looking at, it shows you the 13 colonies. One of the things that I want you to realize also is there were more than 13 colonies. We tend to learn the 13 colonies because those were the final 13 colonies. But we also have other colonies that would be absorbed. Okay, so realize that has happened. That will happen. You ever heard of Franklin? The colony of Franklin? When you get time, look it up. This is kind of interesting. Or New Haven. Some of those, even when you look at like Providence Plantations, some of those. Plymouth colony. When we look at these, I want you to understand the reasons why they were established. Tell me some of the reasons why colonies were established. What? Money, profit, trade. What else? What? Freedom of religion. Guys, when we look at freedom of religion and we're thinking of things that were going on in Europe that possibly made people want to come over, we've talked about the Reformation and the different denominations that would possibly have started off. But when we think of the colonies, I want you to think that just because it says, or we have in our notes, or we have in our minds, things like freedom of religion, okay, it's really not so freedom of religion. If you were in New England, the New England colonies, what religion would you have been? What? Anglican? Not so much the Anglican aspect, but Puritan. Okay? But if you weren't a Puritan, okay, you had a couple of options. Become Puritan. You would probably become a criminal if you didn't celebrate Sabbath when they did on Sabbath. You would, you might be excommunicated or sent out of the community. You might have been, you might have needed to have found a new location. But when you think of New England, you need to think of the Puritans. When you get further down and you get to places like New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, some of those, that's where you're going to see a little bit more freedom of religion. You could be a Catholic, you could be Jewish, you could be whatever kind of denomination was there, Quaker. And that's where you're going to see a little bit more religious freedom. You're going to see, like in Virginia, you're going to see some religious freedoms there and the beginning of groups called Baptists. If we go geographically down, you think North Carolina. North Carolina is really not such a religious place. Religion wasn't a key issue for them. What's their key issue? Money, profit. Virginia is the same way, on that part. But North Carolina would be settled by people from Virginia who were dissatisfied with being in Virginia and the government there. South Carolina is a for-profit colony, but it's going to have a little bit more of your Anglican, more of your connections back to England. The one I find interesting, though, is Georgia. Georgia would be established by James Oglethorpe, and then one of the other benefactors is John Wesley. James Oglethorpe, you know, he helps establish this colony, but it's a buffer state. Have any idea what a buffer state would be? What's a buffer? No idea what a buffer is? What? I could hear you. Let's do this. He is Spain. Okay. He is Spain. He has colonies in, you know, possessions in Florida, maybe Alabama, something like that. Here is South Carolina. And South Carolina is a pretty lucrative colony, and it is kind of the farthest extent of England coming down. But now we have Georgia. Georgia is the middle. Georgia is the in-between. Georgia would be the colony that would help protect the other colonies. The idea that I'm not going to have to worry about the Spanish or the Indians or anything like that bothered me in South Carolina because I have this one in between. Now the people in between are a little bit different. The people who come to Georgia are people like debtors. You know what a debtor is?
Somebody in debt.
Somebody in debt, somebody that owes a debt. It could also be criminals. Would England be so put out, if you will, if a couple of debtors or a couple of criminals, people like that, were to possibly get killed? I doubt it. The idea that Georgia also is an interesting geographical area. You have lots of pine trees. When you cut down pine trees, does it leave a really good soil for you to plant crops? It leaves it real acidic. So not super good for that. So it's not that great of a place anyway. And so anyway, these people are living there. Now this isn't the only time that England is going to do that. It's not the only time that England is going to send people like criminals or debtors, you know, out to colonies. You ever heard of Australia? Australia would be settled, and you know the first part of it is a penal colony. That's where you're going to send the criminals. So why not have them work the area? So that's kind of what they do. Okay, now we've got the colonies. Everything seems to be going well. England, remember, is working with this concept of mercantilism. The idea that in the colonies, you have a raw material. You send that raw material back to England. England makes the finished goods, the clocks, the china, whatever it is, and they bring it back and sell it to our people at exorbitant rates. But everything's going well. Economically, it's going good. But we start having a problem. One of our problems comes about because see, everybody's moving to the colonies here, right? What are these? Mountains. What mountains would those be? Appalachian Mountains. See, these people are moving. You know, you always want the greener grass. You move further inland, and then they start jumping over. Who's here? Who's here? Native Americans are there, but who else is there? What area claimed it? French. This is New France. New France, until you get to the Mississippi River. You got Canada up there, New France, and you got Louisiana. So people are jumping across. You think the French appreciate that? No. The French don't appreciate that at all. They want them to go back. But remember, France doesn't send huge colonies of people over. We've discussed that. They have their trading posts and they have their forts for protection. Yada yada, we have conflict. We have something called what? French and Indian War. Now, of course, that's other names because it does take place also in Europe. 7 Years' War, things like that, 20 Years' War. But there's going to be conflict there. We have a war. Who's going to pay for the war? The English pay for the war. Who's the English? Who are these people here? What are they? Colonists or the English? The English. The English colonists. They might not have the same rights, that the people in England have, but they're, we think we're English, right? Okay. So, war's over. This area goes to, to England, that sort of thing. Canada. This is still French. Out here. French and Indian War. Who's going to pay for it? British have to pay for it somehow. So now they turn around and they're like, you know what? We think you people should pay for it. Mainly because of you, that we have this conflict. Does it sound so bad? Making us pay for a war? Does it really sound bad? Well, it sounds bad when you look at it from the perspective of it's a time period that we call salutary neglect. And that's in the PowerPoint, by the way. You can pull up the PowerPoint if you want to. Salutary neglect is a term that we use for being left alone. See, England wanted us to be completely happy with them because we were trading back and forth. We were making them money. The stuff that they were making in England, we were buying here, and we were sending our stuff back and forth to them. So economically, they were just tickled to death with us. So they left us alone. Can you imagine if I started the school year off, you walked through the door, Dr. Hendrickson greeted you with a computer. And she said, hey, here's your computer. We've already put on all the subjects that you possibly need. Everything you need to know about American history or world history. And we'll see you in May. May comes along, you walk through the door, and then, Dr. Henderson's like, okay, now we're going to see what you know. Have you done all of these things? Now, I know you guys well enough to know that you wouldn't have done anything, right? But then she comes back and she's like, you've got to do this and you've got to complete all this by June because you have to learn all that material. Would you be happy? No. See, by being left alone, that created a problem. If we would have had the constant taxation, everything that went on like the British were doing in England, it probably wouldn't have been so bad, but we were left alone. So now they come out with ways for us to pay this back. So they come out with things like the Tea Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts, the Intolerable Acts. All of those different acts tick people off. You're going to make us, you're going to make us pay all these things, and we don't want to. Realizing also that they were paying more than that in England, which kind of makes our claim a little bit less. One other thing they did, say that I'm going to sit by you because, I am a soldier, and I have been sent over here from England. You know what? I need a place to live. So I'm going to move into your house, and I'm going to take up one of your bedrooms. Do you think it's going to please people? No, because you're going to feed them. They're going to work like one day for you out of the week. That happens. But everything that you can imagine going wrong with that situation, with a soldier moving into your house, the quartering of soldiers, probably happened to some extent. So, that wouldn't have been one of those things you liked either. And see, they were here partly because of all these people that moved here. See, they passed a law that also ticked people off. It was called the Proclamation of 1763. Where they said, all right, all you people that moved over here, back across. Back across the Appalachians. Again, just a constant one thing after the other. People here feel disenfranchised. Would you explain to us, Dr. Henderson, what disenfranchised means?
Disenfranchised. Right now, all of you are disenfranchised. You cannot vote. If you cannot vote, you have no say in the government, so therefore you have no say in what happens to you. that's what these people were feeling in the Americas. That's why everyone's so mad about all of these acts, the Quartering Act, the Stamp Act, and all these different things. They're mad about them. What they forget to realize is that nobody in England had the right to vote either. So the Americans thought that they were special and they should get their own, permission to vote when nobody else had it either. So it was kind of an interesting thing. The English were kind of like, I don't get why the Americans are so mad. We don't get to vote either. But the Americans thought they should.
So we have a conflict. We have a war. You know all the different parts of the war. You know Lexington and Concord. You know Bunker Hill. You know Saratoga, Yorktown, all those things. Benedict Arnold, stories of that. The war's over. One of the things I want you to think about is, what do you win when the war's over? What did we win? Yes, sir.
When?
What?
When?
We won our territory where we're at, right? Kind of self-governing. Does that make sense?
We want our freedom.
Okay, we won our freedom. We won our rights. Okay, but when you think about the war being over, and you think about what you won, if the cost of the war, you're going to have to turn around and pay back to England the cost that they've lost, the business that they've lost, the expense of the war. Is that a real good victory? And then why would England quit? Is it really because we were more powerful? Because a lot of times we envisioned that as a nation we were just much more powerful. Do you think it was that, Dr. Hendrickson?
No, I think they got tired of putting up with this.
And they realized that it was better to deal with us economically. So it's just kind of like, it's over. They're going to allow us to do what we want. We're new. This is a new thing across the globe. Nothing like this had ever really been done. The idea of a colony breaking away and forming its own government, it was new. We were an experiment. We would be an example, across the globe, for that matter. Let's look at that government that we established. First of all, how many states do we establish out of that? 13. There's going to be 13 states that are going to come out of this revolution immediately. But we have to form a government. We have to have something that we follow, some sort of frame. From 1781 to 1789, we follow something called the Articles of Confederation. Now, this particular document that we followed, there were 13 articles. The most interesting of the articles, I think, is the 13th one. It allowed Canada admission into the Union when it wanted. Of course, we know that Canada never did join. But this confederation, of this union of states, didn't work well because it created strong state governments and a weak federal government. We'll see this come about again when we look at our Civil War. You've got these states that together, they would do things like, say, taxes. Okay? They want to pass a tax, maybe to fund military. Maybe we need some sort of army. And I would go up to Massachusetts, and I would say, Massachusetts, I need you to pay a tax, that way we can have an army. And Massachusetts would say, sure, I'll pay that. And then I would go over to Connecticut, and I would say, Connecticut, hey, I need you to pay a tax to help us fund this army. And Connecticut would say, sure, we'll do that. But then we have maybe Rhode Island. And we would go to Rhode Island. Rhode Island's, hey, I need you to help pay taxes. Two of them pay taxes. And Rhode Island go, no, I don't have money for your taxes. I'm not going to do it. And it was no way to really enforce them to do it. Or the idea that Rhode Island makes money. And that Rhode Island money is not as good as the Connecticut money or the Massachusetts money or New York or any other state.
I think you have to understand too that the money's all different. New York has a different money than Virginia and Kentucky, and everybody else has their own money. So when you cross a state, you actually have to change money. So you have to
And the
be
idea that
different.
laws were different in states, or the idea that some states were even trying to talk to other countries and dealing with those. You didn't have any federal power. The idea that you would probably see those states going their own separate ways. So we see that there's problems. So in 1787, we write a document. What do you think that document's called? Constitution. Okay, Constitution. 1787, that was when it was written. 1789 is when it's ratified. Now, we have this document, this Constitution. Constitution starts in 1789. When does it end?
Never.
What?
It hasn't.
It hasn't, because it's a living document. It's a changing document. See, the Articles of Confederation wasn't a document that was easily changed at all. And we have a document now that grows with time. Do you think the writers of the Constitution knew things about, say, automobiles or airline safety?
No.
You know, anything like that? No. But we have it to where we can change things. We can do things. We talked about it in GT. I know we talked about Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the elastic clause, and how with the elastic clause you can interpret, you can add whatever you need to do, you know, as time passes. Of course, we have amendments, right? Remember the first, you have 7 articles. That's the original Constitution, and then you get into the amendments. First 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. We talked about those, you know, kind of extensively, and then we get into the next 17, which were the amendments to the Constitution, where we added things like we ended slavery, we allowed women the right to vote, we outlawed alcohol, and then we put it back. We lowered the age of voting, and then we looked at like the succession of who continues if the president dies. But this Constitution was really interesting because, you know, in the beginning, the original part, we set up 3 branches of government. And we have separate powers. Legislative, executive, judicial. All can check up on one another. We have a Supreme Court, you know, that judges, you know, whether or not something is constitutional or not. Yes, sir?
Why didn't they just take off the Prohibition Amendment? Like, why did they have to add another,
Number?
yeah.
When they just, because in our Constitution, one of the things that's interesting is you'll see in the Constitution where things are changed. Whether it was slavery or whatever it might have been. Slavery is an issue that, especially in the beginning, that we deal with or don't deal with, that is a problem. One of the things that we initially deal with is the selling of slaves. Okay, we give it 20 years, but then in that 20-year time period, you know, for the importation of slaves, we have something called Eli Whitney and his cotton gin that helps perpetuate the need for slaves. Kind of get into, but we'll get into that with more of American history. The next unit we get into is the French Revolution. Or are you going to cover colonization across the globe before you do that?
Colonization.
Yeah, we're going to do colonization elsewhere. What I need you to do now is I need you to read that PowerPoint that I sent you, because it summarizes better, even more than what I talked about. Do you have any questions? Make sure you read this, because it could be a pop quiz at some point. Y'all love my pop quizzes, don't you? Anything that I forgot or you wanted to add?
No.
And again, that was a ultra quick American Revolution. She'll turn it
also sent, if you're doing exhibits for History Day, there's a Google Hangout coming, so I sent it through Moodle, since Moodle does those nice little forum chats, and it sends it to your email. I did that.